Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, welcome.
There he is. Um, Welcome. Should have a good group today. Thanks everyone for joining. I guess we'll start off talking a bit about what's happening in the markets last week. Bon, I know you were itching to chat a bit about like punks and what's happening on Blur and what's happening there. Sort of, people still continuing this with this Blur farming situation, although that seems to be slowing down some. Like, what have you seen going on with punks there? And I mean, it's like they've covered a bit.
When this new liquidity came into the market through Blur, we saw the punk floor move up from like 65 to 75 ETH and was actually feeling pretty good. And then evidently a bunch of bids got smacked pretty hard last night. 75 or 100 punks traded into all these bids that were stacked up for Blur farming, and the floor drops 10 ETH. And, now these people who are farming Blur now long quite a few punks and a little bit underwater. So, I'm not really a big fan of doing trades to get tokens that have some future value that you may or may not know. I tend to not play those games, but obviously there are to be able to put bids in to buy 75 punks. Obviously, you've got to have a pretty good amount of money to do something like that, and probably have done well in this space. It's just not the game that I would choose to play. But I think that overall, I'm not really a fan of turning CryptoPunks into some kind of shitty altcoin and trading it like it's fungible. So, I don't really have a problem necessarily with people, losing money doing that. But I would prefer that punks weren't used in that way. But, I can't, obviously we can't control what how people want to trade. So, uh, go ahead, Abby.
Yeah, fine. Fair. Elsewhere, there's some stuff with Fellowship happening, and post photo is sort of the new craze. AI may be slowing down a touch, but nothing super insane. Coming off the Bright Moments auction last week, I think the passes for Fellowship happened last week. Do we know when the drop is actually happening? Is that still a few weeks away?
Yeah, I think that's the first week in April. The interesting thing is, yes, it seems like the AI space is softening a little bit, although we did see that really large Lost Robbie sale to Punk 703, which was interesting. And evidently, he was one of the Punk sellers too in this recent uptrade with the Blur farming. So hitting on two things. But yeah, Fellowship sold their, and we had the Fellowship people on a couple weeks back, as some of you may remember. The Fellowship Pass came to market earlier in the week around zero point 0.2 ETH. It's done a little bit better, I think, with the post photography movement still, having some traction. I think those could ultimately do pretty well. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I'd be curious if it brings in some new participants, maybe some people at the entry level to NFTs, people interested in photography from the traditional side, et cetera, or if it's just a rotation of people that have been participating in NFTs for some amount of time, a year plus, whatever it is, and this is just sort of the new temporary trend. So be curious to see how that plays out. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what else is coming into NFT NYC, which is what, about 3 weeks away at this point, something like that.
That sounds right. Yeah, 3 weeks. Uh, should we get into it, or what do you think?
Yeah, perfect. So today on the show, we've got LadyCactoid from Cactoid Labs, who has done some type of partnership with LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum, and some great artists, a great lineup. I know we have a couple of them fortunate to join us today. Jen Stark, Def Beef, Sarah Zucker. I think Excell's maybe showing up. I'm not sure on that yet. But yeah, happy to jump right in and we can and start. I know, Vaughn, you wanted to sort of like kick it off and sort of get a top level overview of exactly what this is and maybe a good explainer. So I'll let you sort of take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, AB. Lady Cactoid and our accomplished artists. Very thankful to have you guys all here. Lady Cactoid, maybe you could talk a little bit about the partnership with LACMA and how this came to be, and then the process of bringing some of these artists on, and get into a little bit about where maybe you see how this plays out going forward, and other things that you might have planned going on. with LACMA.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. As you know, I'm such a fan of all of the conversations you guys have been, bringing to fruition here in these spaces. So, I am LadyCactoid. I'm a co-founder of Cactoid Labs, and we're a lab that focuses on bringing artists and museums together within the Web3 arena. I have been working as a curator for over a decade and have a strong interest in art and technology. So I've been lecturing on art in the singularity at universities and doing. So I've done a number of exhibitions at various museums here in LA, including LACMA and MoCA and the Getty. And basically, LACMA has a very rich history of art and technology, which is a little unique in terms of museums as far as that conversation goes. So they've been really exploring this field since they opened as a museum in the 60s. They put together something called the Art and Technology Program, which is now iconic and have brought together Andy Warhol and James Turrell and Robert Irwin to together with entities of the day like IBM and RCA Television and Bell Labs. So that was a very kind of foundational moment for the museum and also for LA, which um, maybe people don't know, but LA has a very rich history of technology companies and universities like Caltech, which is in Pasadena, and then the neighboring JPL in Pasadena, which is a Jet Propulsions Laboratory. So all of that history is kind of a really rich part of Southern California. And so a lot of artists have been exploring what technology can kind of mean for art. So we were invited by the museum to help them build out a blockchain program, which we've been working on for over a year now, and is happily coming to fruition with all these amazing artists that some of whom we have here today with us. Def Beef, Sarah Zucker, Jen Stark, IX Shells, Emily Shia, Monica Rizzoli. And then we have, well, Tyler, Def Beef, will speak to his upcoming project. We also have upcoming projects with William Mapan, Tyler Hobbs, and some artists that we have not announced yet. So it's it's a chance for the museum to continue a conversation that they have been developing for years and to really explore a new tool, which is this decentralized internet that we call Web3. LACMA has, like many museums, been collecting digital art for decades in the form of video art and sound art. But blockchain is a relatively recent phenomenon, as we know, and so it affords like a different set of possibilities. It was always been a challenge for museums to collect time-based media because there's the issue of preserving it, and then there's the issue that it's generally, before blockchain came around, it was difficult to sell because it was ephemeral and not, as Sarah can speak to, it was very difficult for artists to get traction in galleries and with collectors. And so this is really this like new opportunity to honor and like preserve what's happening in the digital space, as well as to reach like a whole new audience. So I think that's a really interesting thing when we think from a macro perspective and zoom out. Like museums are institutions that are always trying to not necessarily reinvent themselves, but to stay current and bring new audiences and different audiences in. So the young digitally native audience that is Web3 is a really exciting group that is international, that museums all over the world are really excited to engage, in exhibition programming, in lectures and metaverse programming. So I think we're really just starting that conversation. LACMA is one of a handful of museums that are really kind of exploring this. I know that everyone probably followed that the Centre Pompidou in Paris recently acquired a number of important NFTs. So, yeah, it's part of a wide kind of shift that these artists are really at the forefront of. And so all these artists will speak, I think, to what they've been creating with the museum, but this initiative is basically an invitation to them to respond to works in LACMA's permanent collection. So Sarah and Jen, Deaf Beef have all been looking at different objects from different time periods and then making new limited digital editions as part of this initiative. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Nice. Thank you for that. Some info on that. I guess I have one question in terms of like the mint passes. Like, is that going? Are there like? I love the art. The art's great. I'm impressed with how well everything's doing in the secondary markets. Just curious if there's going to be any additional like by holding the set, is that going to give us access to some of the future things that you plan to do with LACMA? And just kind of just curious as to what else might be going on here.
Yes, we haven't officially kind of announced how all of that will work, but yes, there will be very tangible benefits to having a full set, and that original mint pass, as well as benefits for people who just have one piece. So we will be announcing all of these kind of use cases soon. Actually, Monica, who couldn't be here with us today, is going to be soon releasing her long form generative series based on the same algorithm that you that she used for the edition that was just released last week. So soon, all the on-chain randomly generated versions of that algorithm, which is this gorgeous, look at this iconic Japanese printmaker named Hokusai. Her interpretation of his tour of Japanese waterfalls, that will be coming in the next couple weeks. So yeah.
Nice, thank you. That was good. Appreciate it.
Cool. I had a quick question just to follow up on something that you touched on a little bit earlier, is how all these works kind of seem to be in conversation with existing works at the museum, and found it kind of interesting because I know Buffalo AKG did a very similar project via Ferrophile, and I know we actually collected one of Sarah's pieces from that drop as well. But I'm just kind of curious, that's kind of an interesting kind of common thread there, that these generative, or sorry, not generative, but digital works, NFTs, if you will, are in conversation with existing works. And it's interesting that two museums have now taken this approach. I'm curious to know why you think that may be. And then also just kind of from Sarah's perspective, how you're thinking about approaching a project like that as an artist.
Yeah. So the Buffalo AKG exhibition was very similar in the sense that Sarah and the other artists involved were responding to works in their collection. And then MoMA's project with Rafiq, which was also on Ferrophile, unsupervised, was also similar in the sense that he was using images from MoMA's permanent collection with his machine learning to generate all those glorious artworks that are now in the atrium of MoMA. But museums have, LACMA in particular, but many museums have an interest in bringing contemporary art into the fold of what they do holistically. So LACMA, unlike unlike MoMA, for instance, MoMA is not an encyclopedic museum. LACMA is an encyclopedic museum, which means that they have, they have objects that date, that are ancient Egyptian artifacts, that are ancient Mesoamerican artifacts. They have objects from all over the world, from really like throughout time. And it's not just a modern and contemporary museum. MoMA is a museum that's origins lie in modern art. So, their collection basically starts with Cubism and that whole tradition. But LACMA has for many years had a program. I've been working with a number of people at the museum, colleagues like Aaron Wright, who is the director of artist initiatives at LACMA, who's been running a print program at the museum where very well-known and celebrated artists like Ed Ruscha and Barbara Kruger and John Baldessari have come in to do physical prints with LACMA. But often that program, they've also been doing film programs where contemporary artists come in and respond to older works in the museum's collection. And it's a really great way for an artist to be in dialogue with a broader span of art history and time, and to have like their art viewed through a different lens. That's been part of my goal with this, is that so often in this Web3 arena, we view and talk about digital art as if it's like operating in a vacuum of the internet and computers, and people are, as we know, responding to all sorts of stories in the world through their art. But LACMA uses that kind of vehicle to expand how we think of contemporary art, but to also expand our interest in older art. So it's a real, oftentimes people have a little bit less interest in going into older wings of museums where objects are like thousands of years old. That's not always the case, but if you put a contemporary artwork next to an object that's thousands of years old, you can often bring in a whole new audience. And doing that with digital art is even kind of more exciting, I think, because we're such a digital society. LACMA is actually currently half under construction, as Sarah and Jen, who are native to Los Angeles, know very well. But when the new wings of the museum open, I'm really excited about seeing, perhaps, in the new wings, these digital works aside these older works, and it will allow people to, think about history in a different way. So it's a vehicle that the museum has been using, but many museums use as a way to just kind of expand people's awareness of art history. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I wonder if we could kick it off to some of the artists now, and either do some intros, discuss a little bit about what your involvement is here, and sort of the impetus for the project and the art that you've contributed. Jen, I guess we'll start with you. Maybe an intro, and then a little bit again into the partnership here with LACMA, and sort of the sort of what you did with your art, and what you were trying to say with it. If not, if she's off for a second, maybe we could kick it to Sarah if you're available.
Sure. Hello.
Hey there.
I just got a text from Jen. She's jumping in and out. She's having some technical difficulties, so she'll be back. Good morning, everyone. And I just want to speak to what was said earlier. I was like delighted by this sort of contextualization that's happening, because that's kind of the big word here. It was noted that we've had sort of these two big museum moments in a row with peer-to-peer at Buffalo AKG, and now with Remembrance of Things Future at LACMA. And I have had the good fortune to be part of both shows, and both have sort of taken this framework of putting these, us cutting edge, wild digital artists working on the blockchain in dialogue with works, from these museums' collections. And when these projects were presented to me, it was sort of like, oh, put myself in the context of the art historical canon, like, don't threaten me with a good time. It's I'm glad it's being noted, because that's what this is, right? And I think that these opportunities as an artist are really a chance for us to flex, a chance for us to flex our creative muscle, because you'll note I use the phrase in dialogue with and not inspired by, because I think that you have to have a certain potency as an artist to take in a work, by another artist of another time, to take it in, to sit with it, digest it, chew on it, and let it be the sort of like seed that creates a completely new artwork. And that's very much how I view my artwork for this project, To Answers. It's a response, and it's definitely has certain origin elements to it that are in response to a work called Two Dancers, that was a woodcut from 1932 by the artist Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, who worked within an era, a moment that we refer to as German Expressionism. And German Expressionism, and specifically German Expressionism, has had a huge influence on me and the development of my visual language and how I express myself in these very bold lines, and with a great sense of like emotionality. And I really just sort of wanted to port the idea of the original woodcut. That's this very clear idea of two bodies merging together through dance. And I sort of brought it into my universe. It's what I call a video painting, which is this style I began developing in 2015 using a Sony video painter from the early 90s, something I have schemed to get my hands on my whole life, pretty much. And I finally got one of these things in 2015 and started thinking, how can I incorporate this into my art practice? How can I use this? And it became one of the cornerstones of what I call my analog video rig, which is this system of, vintage broadcast devices and custom modded hardware and TVs and cameras pointed at TVs and feedback loops. And it's this sort of like spaceship type of thing, command center I've built in my studio, where I sit and I craft these things. And, for me, it's always educating people about how I create my work, because like a lot of artists, I can also be a little secretive, like a witch in my tower crafting spells. But the way that I work is very much tied to the way that we live now and the way that we are experiencing life as this sort of generation being asked to straddle the physical and the virtual. So by that, I mean that I work very much in a digital analog hybrid manner. So I create a lot of work digitally using the same tools any modern artist would use, a lot of Adobe Creative Suite and other, software. And I shoot a lot of footage live. And because my origin, actually, I was a photographer for about 10 years. So this kind of interest in video came out of doing experimental photography. So, I create this work digitally, and then I bring it into the analog ecosystem where, like photography, a lot of it is about herding light. I work in a completely dark room. The walls are painted black. It's very goth. It's very cool. And I, once I get these things into the analog ecosystem, it becomes entirely this process of herding light and herding electricity through circuits. And this piece in particular, Two Answers, this video painting style I've developed, it really encapsulates this digital analog hybrid approach, because it begins digital. I create animations digitally, and then I bring them into this vintage system where I'm working with tools that like predate me. And that's why even the title of this show, Remembrance of Things Future, and this idea of working with an artwork that's, you know, from basic almost 100 years before my time. I think my work really is about time in that way, and it's about manipulating time, and it's about breaking our sense of time more than it is about being nostalgic, because there is obviously a nostalgic quality to my work, as it all exists on VHS tape. That is sort of the prime medium I'm working with. It's the last analog medium before everything went digital, and it exists there. And so I have these, every work of mine you see exists on a tape in my studio that's like temperature controlled and locked in a cabinet. So it was very exciting to do this. I'll wrap up here by saying an opportunity to work with a museum like LACMA, which is, you know, my museum as a resident of Los Angeles County. These are these opportunities you kind of work towards through your entire career as an artist. And you have to seize them, right? You know, there's a bit of this, I think, for any of us doing this kind of stuff, like you have to be willing to be a guinea pig. And I have been a guinea pig now for several years, I'm coming up on my 4th mintiversary here in April. April 4th is the 4th year that I've been minting my work on the blockchain. And so at this point, I'm a guinea pig that's sort of like covered in lipstick, and my hair is matted, and I'm like twitching, and I've been experimented on a lot. And it's been a joy, it's been a pleasure, it's been an honor. So I'm happy to share this work with you all. And the last I'll say about it is this piece of mine, as it's about duality. If you take a look at it, duality is sort of the central theme, and appropriately, it has a counterpart artwork that is also about duality, and they're really meant to go together. And I hope we'll be able to share more with you all about that when the time is right.
Thanks, Sarah. Jen, if you wanted to have a go, hopefully your technical difficulties were sorted.
GM, thanks for having us up. Yeah, I got rugged earlier. For some reason, I couldn't hear just you. I know that happens. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Jen Stark, a visual artist. I live in Los Angeles, so I was really stoked to have this opportunity to collaborate with LACMA and LadyCactoid, Cactoid Labs. You guys were awesome curating this whole thing. So yeah, I'm a visual artist. I've been in the art world for about maybe 15, 16 years, and it's typically been working with galleries, doing sculptures, paintings, stuff like that. And I've always loved the digital world and animations. And when NFTs came around, I was just, you know, drawn to them because there was never really a way for artists to truly get their digital work out there and monetize on it. So this was like a very unique opportunity. There was this movement happening, this whole community forming. I thought it was, you know, a new avenue of art history. So I was really excited about it. And yeah, over the past couple years, I've just immersed myself in the space, met so many amazing artists and people in it. And I was so stoked to be part of this LACMA initiative. For it, I chose a very meditative, kind of hypnotic quilt that was created in 1865. It's called Log Cabin. And I thought it was really interesting to choose something that kind of gave a nod to my past history. My great grandma was a quilter, and she would just create these quilts by hand. Like every single thread is hand sewn, and it's just so intricate and labor intensive. And I love this idea of taking my family history and my past history. In college, I actually studied textiles and fibers, which is really kind of different from what I'm doing now. I'm more like psychedelic digital painting, sculpture. So it's really interesting to bring those two very handmade histories back in this digital realm. So I got inspired by that. It was kind of like vibrational geometry, almost like a mandala quilt. And I just, recreated this hypnotic flowing version of it digitally. And yeah, I'm just super stoked to be part of this. And yeah, thanks for having me up.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Great to hear from you. Ix, what's happening? You want to have a go and sort of do your thing?
Hey, do my
What's
thing.
up?
How are you? How's everyone? Thanks for having me. I just came back from New York where I met AV for the first time in person. We had pizza. I won't reveal your your position, don't worry. But yeah, it was interesting to be there. It's just my second time in the US and like there's a lot happening. Yeah, I'm very glad that I'm very happy to be part of this project with LACMA. Um, I think what I've been thinking these days is I wish that this is something that can be replicated by other countries, other places, especially in Latin America, where, art is it's in a way in a very pure state. Like we don't have such thing as, you know, collectors like fighting their way to get an opportunity to acquire art. Like we are actually lacking of that, and that causes that artist just like, okay, like maybe I'll do art because I love it, but I don't think I can ever live from that. And there's so many essays written by artists down here about that. You know how it is. I bet. So yeah, like I think this opportunity for me opens doors for many others. That's one of the main reasons why I feel so proud about it. And I also feel proud of being a dialogue with one of the first artworks or photograph acquired by the museum in the 1800s. I think I've been talking about the fact that this is very similar to what's going on with blockchain technology and their relationship with art. It's changing everything for us, from our economy to the way we live, the way we share with each other. Like 2 years ago, I wouldn't be thinking, well, I'll be in spaces or in podcasts or articles. But yeah, it's a rain of opportunities for artists. And this photograph was a rain of opportunities for scientists back in the day. They had the opportunity to study plants for a longer period of time and their texture, the details, and that's one of the reasons why I picked this. Also, I imagine this artwork to be part of a big space. Um, Hopefully, it can become a room one day where people can walk and touch the remainings of this data that was used for the art. Um, it's one of my dreams, and thank you for the opportunity, LadyCactoid again, and LACMA, to leave this for the future generations to remember what I was doing during these times.
Right on. Thanks, Ix. I wanted to talk a little bit to the artists about like sort of like your toolkits and like what you use to make the art. I guess Ix, I'll throw it back to you really quickly. I know you use like Touch Designer and some of the things. Like, what is that generally what you're always using? Do you sort of switch between different things to create the art? Talk a little bit about like what you use for this piece within the partnership with LACMA and what you use more generally.
Touch Designer is my software of choice. It's I started with just anything I could use. I used to go on to Notepad++, which is it's a software that lets you corrupt the data on images or videos. Everything I will look at all day was just data and like random numbers or and I think I started using Touch Designer the most because this is a type of software that lets you see what you're doing and the changes on each operation. For example, sometimes I take artwork out of like an operation, like noise algorithms instead of using the final output, because even that is, for me, is striking and really beautiful and it can be used. Sometimes I even use the entire composition of the program, which looks like puzzles, or it's just have an interesting way of looking. And I also use photographs and videos that I take on a daily basis. Like, I wanted to be an architect for a long time, so I used to take photos of buildings and houses and things that were really interesting for me. I'll play with shadows and light and nature, and I still do that. I create stories based on what comes in front of me every day, even if it's friends, if it's like the side of the plane or a sunrise or anything. Anything can become art. So I use all of that, and I the data to create generative art. I also use sounds. Someone asked me what makes my heart beat the other day, and I said that it was music, because everything has like sound to me. Like, even if you can hear it, you can feel the vibrations of, like maybe the train passing, or like people passing the pages on a book, or my voice. And I think all of that can summarize what makes my heart beat. It doesn't have to be something specific. So yeah, that's what I use the most. Just everything that I have in hand that makes me feel curious.
Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome that every artist on this stage has their own kind of unique way of creating art and their own unique practice and unique
I'm not
toolkit.
sure Matt, his connection is bad.
Oh,
Sarah,
shit.
I'll throw it back to you. I know you talked a little bit about using Creative Suite and some other things. Is that generally what you only use, or do you expand further out from there?
Sure, happy to jump in. No, I was really resonating with what Itzel was saying, that like anything can be art. And I really use such a wide array of tools, and I think that that's how I've been able to develop sort of my signature style or styles. I work, well, people often recognize my work is existing as a sort of analog video in its final form. I use just so many different tools going into my work, and this begins, like I said, I shoot a lot of footage live, and I use a lot of photographic techniques, I think, in what I'm doing and how I'm making things. And like I said, I'm a little bit of like an alchemist, so I like to keep some of the secret sauce for myself, but a lot of my work, I think what people are responding to and why they can't quite figure out what they're seeing, what they're looking at, is because I play often with like screens upon screens upon screens. And what I mean by that is that like the feedback loop is sort of an essential leitmotif in my work. It's an essential like factor in what I'm doing. And I create feedback loops in a lot of different ways. the feedback loop, it's you can see it in nature. It's just anything that iterates unto itself. And so you see it in a lot of like fractal patterning, and it's all around us all the time. And I won't get too heady, but like in terms of like logic and how we think and how we exist on the internet, we used to live in a very linear fashion as human beings. You're born, you eat, you shit, you fuck, you die. And now now we live on the internet, where we're born and then we experience like multifractal web connection with each other, and then we die, question mark. Like, we're not sure anymore. Like, we're reaching the singularity. We're close to AGI. We're close to all these things that sort of change our entire definition of what it is to be a human being. And to me, the feedback loop, like logically, is kind of the defining principle of all of that. I know I'm getting a little out there. I'm getting metaphysical, but it's to say that's why I think I play with the feedback loop so often as a visual motif. And for anyone, if you're like, what the fuck is she talking about right now? The feedback loop, visually, if you have a camera that's hooked up to a TV and you point the camera at the TV and it explodes with chaos, that's a feedback loop. And that's sort of the central thing I'm working with. And if you've ever done that, you also know, again, it's so chaotic, right? It creates all this like crazy visual noise. And so that's something I really pride myself in these years as I've been like developing my practice, developing my style, that I have a number of different ways that I sort of like, I'm a feedback cowboy, like I tame that chaos and I can make it into a true loop, because a feedback loop is a paradox. It doesn't actually loop because it's reiterating. So it's really quite a thing visually to be able to make a looping composition out of something that doesn't actually loop. And so it's that really, like I said, I bring things from all over the place. I create animation, use After Effects a lot. That's probably one of the big ones. And but I'm also using my own assets. I'm also using an archive dating back to my adolescence of like footage and photos I've shot, similar to Itzel in that way. And I shoot a lot of stuff live in my studio. And then, right, that moment where I work with the analog video rig, the analog system is just so different than digital. Like, we are so used to this idea that we can be working on something and save it and come back to it tomorrow and work on it some more and save it and come back to it the next day. The analog rig has no saving. There is no saving in the analog system. So when you witness my work, it's often like, days, weeks, months of sketching, animating, creating various assets I want to work with. Because then when I approach the analog system, I have to be bold in channeling it the way I want it in that moment, in a single sitting, and like hope I don't pee my pants, because there's no saving. So anymore, a lot of the work you see of mine, I've gotten much more particular and much more granular about what I do. So sometimes it'll take 4, 5, 6 seatings at the analog rig before I get the composition exactly as I want it. And so, yeah, it's a really particular way of working, and it's only could be developed this way through, at this point, I've been working with the analog system for about 8 years. So it's 8 years of just organic artist weirdness that has developed into these sort of processes that are mine unto myself.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Jen, do you want to come on and talk a little bit about it? Let us know some of your secrets, or what?
I will. Yes, I will. So, yeah, I usually use, in my work, I love working with a variety of things, even in my fine artwork, painting, sculptures, I bounce back and forth. And in the digital world, NFT space or immersive interactive world, I usually collaborate with people and we'll use like After Effects, Cinema 4D, Touch Designer. But for this piece, I actually used Illustrator and Photoshop. It's, a pretty like handmade, hand animated process. And I love kind of jumping back and forth between all of them. And I started out actually as a stop motion animator in college. Animation was my minor. So I've always loved the kind of handmade, sequential, step-by-step process. And I like the idea of mixing sculpture with animation. So I would create my like old school signature kind of vortex paper sculptures in stop motion format. So I would hand cut each of these papers and, place them in different moments for each frame. And it just like starts kind of like growing in this infinite vortex of colors and shapes and sounds. So yeah, I try to use a different variety of things, just so things don't get static. And yeah, that's a couple of my secrets.
Let me see if this works. Can you guys hear me? Twitter Spaces is back
I
at
hear
it
you.
again. All right, let's go. All right, so I was curious, like, just to kind of dig in a little bit more about each artist's respective creative process. Like, it's pretty cool how everyone has their own unique approach to creating their art. But I also am like wondering, like, it's kind of a bit of a balancing act, right? Like, you want to stay true to your style that defines you as an artist, but you also want to continue pushing and trying new ways of creative avenues. So I'm curious to like know from each artist how they think about that and how they kind of balance those two seemingly conflicting, or oftentimes conflicting, initiatives. If that question made any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Oh,
The lag makes me think I asked a shitty question on Twitter Spaces, so you never know.
no, it's
Yeah.
not.
It's
Go ahead. It's fine.
okay. We're all so polite. Yeah, that's a really cool question. I actually really dig that. I think because for me, it's funny. It's like there's the way you create like at large, and then there's the way you create to release editions. Those are kind of different but connected things, right? Like I've heard people say this idea of sort of like create freely and mint thoughtfully, and I've very much adhered to that notion since I began doing all this, because we're all doing this thing right now, being artists, working in this space where we're sort of like dogs walking on their hind legs. We're Many of us are our own gallerists. We're our own, we're not just artists. We have to present our work in a way thoughtfully for collectors and kind of guide that side of it. So that adds a factor, I think, to what you're doing in your art practice that I've always tried to view as a boon, as like a benefit, because it helps me. I am a pretty wide reaching in what I get excited about, what I get interested in, and I want to create, and it gives me something to come back to kind of present the work in a thoughtful and guided way. And I made the decision early on, I'm sure any artist can relate to this, where if you work in kind of a number of different styles, or you're not just sort of recreating the same piece a lot, it can be very tempting when you start to have commercial success for one style, to want to just say, okay, let me just do that again because I'd like to have that happen again. I don't know, and so I'm just kind of riffing here, but it's to say for me, I made the decision early on to both focus very much on this digital analog practice of mine, but also let it be expansive. And so in my case, it makes it harder, but I'm trying to always do something new in some way with everything I do, even if it's a continuation of a pre-existing or predefined style. I'm always trying new things and trying to bring some sort of new spice into it. I also think for me, I'm sort of at an inflection point in my work. I've been very fortunate in this space, and I'm figuring out how to expand into different dimensions with what I do to kind of keep it fresh, and to also just be brave and see what will take and where it will take me.
Do our other artists want to weigh in on that question that was asked earlier?
Sure, I'll jump in a little bit. In regard to, there's such a fine line of, you want to keep it fresh, like Sarah said. You want to be brave. You want to come up with these new ideas, but you also want to kind of have some signature style that people can recognize, and that's like this through line with your work. So it's an interesting line that artists have to balance. And yeah, I think artists should always kind of reach out of their comfort zone and try new things. You have to mess up. You have to create the bad work in order to sludge through to the good work. So, I mean, it's important to try it all.
Thank you for that, Jen. I have a question for LadyCactoid. But before I ask the question, if there are anybody in the audience that might want to ask a question, not shill something, to our guests and speak, now would be the time to request it. LadyCactoid, the question I have for you, we've had some problems. Deaf Beef was supposed to be able to speak, but we've had some connection issues with him. I was just wondering if you might be able to speak a little bit about what Deaf Beef might be doing in relationship to the LACMA Cactoid Labs next upcoming offering, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, I won't give too much away because Deaf Beef is in the process of working on this, but it's really cool. So there are a number of works by the early photographer Edward Muybridge in LACMA's collection, which Deaf Beef is basically researching and responding to. So if you guys know Muybridge, he was known for basically taking some of the first what they called like chronophotography. He was able to track how a horse, so this was like in the late 19th century and like the 1870s. The camera was relatively new. The camera was invented in 1839, and so this was about 30 years into that, and he started using the camera to see if they could basically track what a horse looks like galloping, and so seeing their hooves leave the ground and kind of enter the air as they're moving. That was never No one had ever done that before. So Muybridge started using the camera to basically show people what could be done with this new device, and to sort of prove to people how these horses moved. Basically, it became the basis, like this form of photography for films, for motion camera work. And so it's really like a very, very important moment in the history of art and photography, and is something that anybody who studies photography has to look at some point. So Deaf Beef is looking at a number of these works in LACMA's collection and exploring them in some very fascinating ways, which I don't want to sort of give away too much, but it's very in dialogue with that body of work. That body of work in and of itself is a sort of meditation on time. So it's a very fitting project to explore within this rubric of Remembrance of Things Future, which is as a whole a meditation on time. So it's that will be on the near horizon. And it's too bad that Jeff Beef was basically rugged by Twitter, but he will speak about this in other conversations and has spoken a little bit about it in some conversations we've had. So yeah, I'm really excited for him to share all of that with you guys. It's going to be quite cool. And then William is also here listening and is working on works in LACMA's collection that deal with a lot of texture with materials like plaster. And I won't give too much away, but William was working on something quite exciting as well. So yeah.
Great.
Is there a time frame on when these works will be, the future works will be released, like William, Def Beef, some of the other artists that you've discussed that may be coming on later?
So I think that Def Beef is going to be releasing his work in like mid or late April. And then William will be in May. So this is all a lot of the programming is taking place alongside an exhibition called Coded: Art Enters the Computer Age, which is up at the museum through July 2nd. And I had the great pleasure of taking Fungible, who's in the audience, as well as Eric Calderon and some other really great people in this space through the exhibition yesterday. But there's a really strong dialogue, not only with works that are like, early photography and stuff like that at LACMA, but in this early computer art that is currently on view. And so that's another kind of conversation that we're trying to foreground with this project.
Perfect, fair. I don't see any specific audience questions at the moment, but nevertheless, definitely wanted to thank all of the artists that came on. Itzel, Sarah, Jen, I know Def, we had some issues getting you on stage, but hopefully look forward to the work upcoming. Big thanks to LadyCactoid and the work she's doing with LACMA to profile some of these great artists alongside the current exhibition, Coded, that she just referenced. Look forward to that and look forward to the upcoming programming over the next few months. So I want to thank everyone for joining today. Again, thank the artists and LadyCactoid and everybody's work all together. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for our next show. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.